On the night of September 14, 1942, crewmen aboard the U.S. Navy submarine Wahoo observed smoke curling from the funnel of a ship exiting Truck's North Pass. Lieutenant Commander Marvin Kennedy fired 4 torpedoes at the 6,438-ton Japanese freighter Buyo Maru. The first 3 missed, but the frantic Japanese helmsman veered straight into the path of the 4th. The torpedo struck directly amidships on the port side, detonating a cargo hold packed with ammunition. As the stricken ship erupted like a volcano, an escorting destroyer began launching depth charges. Kennedy dove his submarine to 230 feet beneath a thermal layer that deflected sonar, concealing them from the furious escorts. The U.S. Navy launched Wahoo from its Mare Island shipyard near San Francisco on Valentine's Day, 1942. Construction had already begun when Imperial Japan struck Pearl Harbor. Even before her launch, Navy High Command had assigned her mission: conduct unrestricted submarine warfare. Her crew was eager to strike back at the distant island nation that had so brutally attacked their homeland. They could not have imagined the scale of vengeance they would unleash. By summer, Wahoo was finished, her crew fully trained for combat, and her hold stocked. She steamed into the Pacific with purpose at 10 a.m. on August 23, 1942. To keep the momentum in the Pacific, American forces needed to neutralize or at least pressure the heavily fortified Japanese stronghold at Truk Atoll to stop reinforcements from reaching garrisons on targeted islands. Located in the heart of the Caroline Islands, Truk was ringed by coral reefs, preventing large warships from closing in to bombard shore targets. With Japanese air and naval power threatening any fleet that might attempt to bypass it, the base stood as a hornet's nest ready to strike. Lacking bomber bases within range, the Allies had only one option for striking Truk: submarines. Wahoo arrived on the morning of September 4th, just after sunrise on the 6th. Kennedy was called to the periscope by his alert lookouts. He launched 3 torpedoes in 6-second intervals at a freighter heading southeast across Wahoo's bow, but all failed to connect. The sea then turned empty for more than a week, leaving the restless American crew hunting in vain. Then, on the night of September 14th, disaster nearly struck when a torpedo in the number 1 forward bow tube suddenly activated on its own and blasted through the chamber's outer door. Though the warhead failed to detonate, the torpedo stuck halfway out of the tube, leaving the submarine dangerously exposed to depth charges. Yet the crew never considered abandoning their patrol. Dismissing the crippled weapon protruding from their bow, they pressed on and sent Buyo Maru to the bottom. After that first kill, the seas turned barren once more, and after a month of unrewarded searching, a frustrated Kennedy brought Wahoo back to Pearl, still bearing the faulty torpedo lodged in its tube. For 3 weeks, the boat underwent repairs and resupply, while her restless crew longed to resume their hunt. On November 8th, the determined Kennedy once more turned west, commanding a refreshed crew just as eager to make their mark. Their assigned patrol zone lay north of Japanese-occupied Bougainville Island, through which supply and troop convoys routinely sailed to reinforce Guadalcanal. With the Imperial Navy dominating the waters around the Solomons, it was vital to sever these lifelines if the U.S. Marines, who had landed on Guadalcanal in August, were to stand any chance of prevailing. The hunt remained fruitless until December 10th. That night, Wahoo ambushed a convoy moving between Buka Island and the Kilauea Islands. The determined Americans crept within 700 yards of the 8,748-ton Buyo Maru and turned her into a raging inferno. Though rocked by depth charges from escorting ships, the submarine dove deep and successfully slipped away. The Japanese seemed to grasp that a particularly deadly predator was loose and chose to counter it with one of their own. On the morning of December 14th, a Japanese I-class submarine unknowingly crossed Wahoo's bow. Rushing from the shower, Kennedy dashed to the periscope, soaked and completely nude, and gave the order as his forward torpedoman fired 3 shots from just 800 yards. One torpedo slammed into the enemy sub just ahead of the conning tower, and she vanished in seconds. 5 days later, Kennedy and his men completed their patrol and turned south for Australia. Kennedy received a new assignment, and his executive officer, Lieutenant Commander Dudley Morton, assumed command for the boat's 3rd War Patrol. On January 15, 1943, Wahoo departed for the shores of New Guinea. On the afternoon of the 24th, Morton was preparing to strike a small Japanese naval anchorage on New Guinea's eastern coast when new First Officer Richard O'Kane, peering through the second periscope, shouted, "Destroyer underway! Angle 10 port!" With no time or room to dive, Morton aimed Wahoo directly at the oncoming threat and fired a spread of torpedoes. The first 4 missed, but the 5th tore the destroyer apart. As their target sank bow first, the Americans slipped away into open water before enemy aircraft could respond. On the morning of January 26th, Wahoo tracked down a Japanese troop convoy consisting of 3 freighters. Employing both torpedoes and her deck gun, she sank 2 of the ships and left the 3rd heavily damaged, though it escaped for the moment. By 3 p.m., however, the submarine had overtaken the crippled transport, now joined by a tanker. Morton swiftly dispatched the 6,515-ton oiler Buyo Maru, but just as he moved to finish off the freighter, a destroyer came charging in from the port side. Diving deep, Morton correctly predicted the transport's route and angled Wahoo toward it, away from the onrushing destroyer. The sub surfaced just as the target crossed 3,000 yards astern. Lining up the shot, Morton guided the aft torpedo room crew as they prepared the last 2 torpedoes. After 3 tense minutes, both struck home, sinking the 9,684-ton Arizona Maru along with her load of infantry reinforcements. In a 14-hour spree, Wahoo destroyed 4 ships totaling 30,557 tons. Including the earlier destroyer kill, her tally had reached 5 before even arriving in her designated patrol zone. With torpedoes spent, Morton set course for Pearl Harbor. That night, the elated crew received a radio message from Admiral William Halsey himself, commending their achievement. They arrived back on February 7th. The historic patrol lasted only 24 days, the shortest full war cruise ever completed by a U.S. submarine. After just 8 days in Pearl Harbor, Wahoo cruised past the blackened wreck of the battleship Arizona and headed west. Following a refuel stop at Midway on the 27th, the crew set course for the East China and Yellow Seas. By March 10th, they reached the coast of Kyushu, one of Japan's home islands. The next day found them in busy shipping lanes linking Kyushu's southwestern ports to the Empire's occupied lands. Finding the waters empty, Morton turned Wahoo's bow on the 13th toward what he hoped would be busier shipping lanes off Korea. Just before dawn on March 19th, a silhouette broke the horizon with a vibrant sunrise glowing behind a large transport. Eager to test their updated weaponry, the crew stood ready. In Pearl, Wahoo had been reloaded with torpedoes tipped with a new explosive, Torpex, designed to reduce the number of hits needed to sink a ship. "Fire just 1 torpedo," Morton ordered. The sub fell so still with anticipation that every sailor aboard heard First Officer Richard O'Kane press the firing plunger. 49 seconds later, the crew was jolted by a thunderous blast far beyond what they thought 1 torpedo could produce. At the attack periscope, Chief Thomas McGill watched in disbelief as the freighter's stern vanished in a violent eruption. Within 3 minutes, all that remained was scattered debris. The ship was the 4,065-ton Nanka Maru, and even if her radio had survived, there hadn't been time to send a warning about the devastatingly armed attacker. Sure enough, before 8 a.m., the Americans sank the 5,725-ton transport Buyo Maru nearby. As a storm rolled in, Wahoo steered toward the Korean harbor of Chinampo. March 22nd proved eventful. At daybreak, the Americans obliterated an unidentified freighter. By 9:30 a.m., they had crept within just 800 yards of the transport Nida Maru and struck her aft with a pair of torpedoes. That night, the crew set a course for the bustling waters near the Lao Ti Shan promontory, which extends into the Gulf of Po Hai. In the early hours of March 23rd, they sent the 2,427-ton coal carrier Gato-class Maru to the bottom. But by 10 a.m., they heard the rumble of depth charges pounding the site of the attack. Realizing that destroyers were closing in, they quietly exited the area. As the sun dipped low on March 24th, Morton's lookout spotted a large tanker heading toward Port Arthur. Aligning the aft tubes, the skipper fired from a near-perfect broadside position at 1,700 yards. The first 2 torpedoes failed, detonating just 18 seconds into their runs. The third darted into the swirling void left by the earlier blasts and spiraled wildly out of control. Now alerted, the enemy evaded a 4th torpedo and returned fire on Wahoo with deck guns using flashless powder. Diving to avoid return fire, the crew soon surfaced and plotted a course to intercept their target near its likely destination, Dairen Harbor. Swinging ahead of the tanker, they caught her just 4 miles from safety, perfectly outlined by the rising moon. At 9:22 p.m., Morton aimed the forward tubes at the ship, now only 1,200 yards away, and launched 3 torpedoes. The first 2 missed, but the third struck true, igniting over 3 million gallons of fuel. Flames consumed the 7,499-ton Buyo Maru, casting a midday glow across Dairen Harbor. Though not yet out of torpedoes, Wahoo had already scored 7 kills on this cruise. At 3 a.m. the following morning, the Americans were forced to fire a torpedo and numerous deck gun rounds into a stubborn merchantman that refused to go down. Just as the small vessel finally slipped beneath the waves, an armed tanker came barreling toward Wahoo. As soon as they sighted the sub, the Japanese opened fire with 40mm anti-aircraft guns. Morton retreated on the surface, replying with Wahoo's 4-inch deck gun. His 5th shot knocked out the enemy's weapons and disabled her engines. Reversing course and closing in, the crew pounded their reckless foe into a blazing inferno. By 6:15 a.m., both of these latest targets had slipped beneath the waves. The morning's first victim had been a Shinsei-class freighter, followed by the 1,000-ton Hirachi Maru. As daylight spread, the Americans spotted the mast of an incoming destroyer and began to hear the buzz of aircraft overhead. With only 2 torpedoes left, the crew slipped beneath the surface and quietly made their way out of the danger zone. In the early hours of March 29th, Wahoo was patrolling north of Formosa when her radar operator picked up a large ship heading south from Shanghai. Moments after Morton launched his final 2 torpedoes from only 900 yards, chaos erupted aboard the submarine. Many crewmen were unaware an attack had been launched on the suddenly appearing ship, and both torpedoes struck with near-simultaneous pinpoint accuracy. The thunderous blast echoing through Wahoo sent panic rippling through the sub as several sailors mistook it for enemy depth charges. While terrified men grabbed life vests, O'Kane had a sailor announce over the loudspeaker, "The sound you hear is the ship breaking up." But the man forgot to specify it was the enemy ship sinking, only adding to the confusion. Amid the chaos, O'Kane and Morton neglected to steer away, and Wahoo nearly rammed the sinking 5,193-ton Buyo Maru. Yelling, "Full right rudder!" Just in time, O'Kane then hurried through the sub to reassure the shaken crew. Including a small radar trawler they had riddled with deck fire on March 27th, the raiders had eliminated 10 Japanese ships during this patrol. On April 6, they returned to Midway and received a hero's welcome. Major electrical repairs kept Wahoo docked until the 25th. During that time, Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz honored Morton with the Navy Cross and O'Kane with the Silver Star. Both men accepted their awards in tribute to their crew and their submarine. When Wahoo returned to her vast patrol area, sister submarines Steelhead, Pickerel, and Scorpion joined her. Together, they scoured the seas for a Japanese flotilla that counterintelligence claimed was bound for the Aleutians. Finding no sign of the force, the subs split up and moved to their assigned sectors. Morton and his crew reached the frigid waters off Onekoton, one of the Kuril Islands, on May 2nd. On May 4th, the hunters damaged a military transport aircraft carrier, but it reversed course and escaped back through Perouse Strait. On the 7th, the Americans sank a 5,700-ton Buyo Maru-class freighter. The following day, they attacked another cargo ship off northeastern Honshu, but the first torpedo detonated early, throwing the second off target. When the third finally struck but failed to explode, a destroyer locked on to Wahoo's position and launched a depth charge attack. Shaken by the blasts, the sub slipped away and headed for Konesaki. At 2:30 a.m. the next morning, they sank the 9,527-ton tanker Harusame Maru and the 9,467-ton freighter Hawaii Maru. Continued torpedo failures left Morton out of ammunition by May 12th, and he turned back toward Pearl. Arriving on May 21st, Morton was awarded a Gold Star in lieu of a second Navy Cross, while O'Kane earned his second Silver Star. This marked O'Kane's final patrol aboard Wahoo. He was soon given command of the newly commissioned attack sub Tang, a promotion that would ultimately save his life. The celebrated Wahoo steamed all the way to San Francisco for overhaul and resupply. She quickly became a magnet for politicians, reporters, and patriotic well-wishers. Her 7th patrol was planned as an ambitious circuit around the Japanese home islands, including a run through the Sea of Japan. Departing on July 21st, the mission was plagued by an unusual string of torpedo failures. Frustrated, Morton ended the patrol early without sinking any of the 6 ships he had targeted. On August 29, 1943, America's deadliest submarine returned to Pearl Harbor for the final time. On September 12th, Wahoo departed for the busy shipping lanes between Japan and the Asian continent. Post-war analysis of the Imperial Japanese Navy's records shows that on October 2, 1943, she sank a 2,968-ton Taiko Maru-class freighter. 3 days later, she destroyed a 9,000-ton troop transport, and the following morning took out the 1,288-ton Kanko Maru. On the storm-tossed morning of October 9th, she launched 3 torpedoes at another Kanko Maru-class freighter. The first 2 struck home, fatally crippling the ship, but the third veered off course in the rough seas, looping around and slamming into Wahoo's own forward torpedo room. 2 days later, Japanese artillery spotters sighted the damaged sub moving slowly across the surface of Cape Soya Strait and sounded the alarm. Anti-submarine float planes and sub-chasers soon swarmed the area, unleashing a relentless barrage of depth charges. By 1:30 p.m., the sea was slick with oil, scattered debris, and dead fish. USS Wahoo was never heard from again. Lieutenant Commander Dudley Morton was posthumously awarded a second Navy Cross. Like 3,505 other American submariners of World War II, he remains on eternal patrol. Though they made up just 2% of the Navy's wartime manpower, these men were responsible for sinking more than half of all Japanese shipping lost to Allied forces. With no heavy bomber bases close enough to strike Japan's industrial core until late 1944, it was the U.S. submarine fleet that strangled the Empire's ability to supply and sustain its distant war fronts. Before this conflict, Japan had never truly tasted naval defeat. The U.S. submarine force introduced its relentless foe to a deadly new style of combat. Wahoo led the charge and taught her sister boats the art of devastation.